Jonesy and Amanda.
Jam Nation.
And for the first time in the new digs, Emma Gillespie is here. Hello, Emma.
Hello, good morning. How are we going?
Great to have you here.
What
Great
an
to be here.
interesting time to have you on the show this week. Bruce Lehrmann, in a civil trial that he brought himself, a defamation trial, has been called by the judge, to, by all intents and purposes, be a rapist.
Exactly. A federal court judge finding this week that it's more likely than not that Bruce Lehrmann raped Brittany Higgins, meaning he wasn't defamed by journalist Lisa Wilkinson and Network 10. So a bit of a refresher, this case was brought by Bruce Lehrmann after the criminal trial fell through. So that was in relation to allegations that Brittany Higgins claimed in 2019 in Parliament House that she was raped by Bruce Lehrmann. In 2021, those allegations were aired on The Project, but Lehrmann wasn't named. He was never identified in that interview explicitly by name, but he had argued that he was still identifiable from that interview, and that kind of formed the basis of this civil trial.
And when the criminal trial was disbanded, it was because of the bad behaviour of one of the jurors.
Yeah, so juror misconduct. And I think also really important to point out that with that falling through, Bruce Lehrmann was never found guilty. He was never found not guilty of rape in a criminal court. He wasn't found of anything because that fell through.
That juror's misconduct, can we talk about that?
So it was.
Does anyone know what the juror actually did?
It was that the juror had brought in a news article into the deliberation room. So they had been engaging with external media.
And doing some
If you're
kind of
in a jury,
investigation.
yeah, you're not supposed to be looking at that kind of stuff. But in this civil case, it's the first time that a trial to do with this story has actually come to a conclusion, to a finding, and that is, on the balance of probability, it's more likely than not that Bruce Lehrmann did rape Brittany Higgins, and therefore 10's defence was this truth defence, that they were saying they couldn't have defamed him because they were telling the truth. I think the difference here between a civil trial and a criminal trial is important to talk about, because this balance of probability, we're hearing that term thrown around a lot today. What that actually means is that it's more likely than not, so that a judge had to be certain, not to a 100% standard, but a 51%, if you will, that it probably happened, that Brittany Higgins more than likely was raped, that all of these sort of hypotheses and options and stories, that this is the one that he believes, this justice believes, is most likely the truth. Whereas in a criminal court, you have to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. So that's this idea that there is no doubt in your mind that there is no other alternative storyline that you think has some weight that could discredit that idea, that is 100% what happened. So it's a really different burden of proof, and that's why people have been a little bit more cautious in how they're talking about this one.
What's interesting, though, is it makes us look at the vilification of Brittany Higgins. As it was said yesterday, there is no perfect victim, and how hard it will be for women to come forward if your scenario isn't 100% black and white. And in whose cases is that ever going to be the case?
Exactly.
Brittany has been through the ringer through this, so she obviously wasn't in court yesterday, but I hope that she took a deep breath and hope she can call off the hounds for a while.
Yeah, and we heard from Justice Michael Lee, it was 2.5 hours of findings that he handed down, 300 odd pages, really, really thorough findings.
But wasn't it 16,000 pages of stuff? Who's going to read all that?
Well, he has to.
It will form a
reading
basis for
16,000?
future kind of defamation cases, I think,
Sure.
in this country. So, it'll kind of be something that law students will probably be studying in no time. But I think we've got to grab from the findings a moment, significant
we love
moment.
what he said here.
Mr. Lehrmann's state of mind was such that he was indifferent to Miss Higgins' consent and just went ahead willy-nilly. Having escaped the lion's den, Mr. Lehrmann made the mistake of coming back for his hat.
Can I talk about entitlement as well with the Channel 7 Spotlight program? So they were the ones that did this story on Bruce Lehrmann. And what we're hearing now, allegedly, from one of the producers, is that he claims that Bruce Lehrmann, at the time, they knew that he had been accused of 2 rapes, 2 separate rapes. One was Brittany Higgins, another was a case in Toowoomba. They knew this when they lured him to tell his story, to sit down and tell the story, and they wooed him by paying his rent, by allegedly paying for sex workers and for alcohol and drugs. And so this boys' club stuff just keeps going and going and going.
Yeah, this case, the evidence hearing part of this, we were supposed to get a finding on this trial weeks ago, and then this explosive kind of new information came out from this Channel 7 producer who claimed exactly what you say, Amanda, that Channel 7 had spent all this money on wooing Lehrmann, getting confidential material from his criminal trial, and that hundreds of thousands of dollars was spent on sex workers, drugs, accommodation. And that essentially halted the findings being handed down because 10 were able to convince the Justice Michael Lee in this situation that he should hear this new evidence and hear these new sensational claims about how Lehrmann might have compromised evidence and files that he said were only supposed to be shown to that court, but that he had shared with 7. It was just another chaotic chapter in this ongoing circus of a story, really, that at the end of the day is about a really traumatic incident.
Absolutely.
But how many careers have been ended because 2 millennials had a night out on the vodkas? Like, really? Have a look at it.
But not just that. I mean, if he has raped her,
Look,
and
and
this
I'm
is a
not-
civil trial.
Yeah, exactly.
This is
But I'm just saying.
But I always say to my sons, if a girl is drunk, she's not giving consent.
Yes,
Of
that is
course.
which is
There was
what we
no
heard
consent.
in
And
this
there's-
trial.
And also the footage of him plying her with alcohol, that's been well documented.
This
And-
is the story of our times.
Yeah.
It really is.
Of course.
I think it was refreshing to hear the judge sort of acknowledge that this was an inebriated young woman in her 20s who was lured into this situation, and he believes that Bruce Lehrmann's intentions were never to go back to Parliament House to write some notes about French submarine deals.
That's a euphemism.
He cut her off and put her in a vulnerable situation. He did acknowledge that neither of them were particularly credible witnesses. He did sort of acknowledge that Brittany Higgins, there were some holes in her story, but he also commented on a trauma response. And I thought this was interesting hearing about someone in that level talking about this, that for victims of trauma, they will often have splintered memories and recollections of an incident like that. It's your body helping you cope with something by blocking those memories out.
And the trauma of the trial, of the press pile-on, what a mess. And is this the end of it?
It's not over yet. We've got a hearing next week where both sides will present their costs. Essentially, 10 and Lisa Wilkinson's legal team will be going after the legal costs of bringing this defamation trial, which will be easily into the millions. Look how long it's gone on for. It also does open the door up for another criminal prosecution. We have no idea what will happen if that will be brought again, but potentially it could be brought. It's not a double jeopardy thing. He was never found guilty or not guilty in this criminally. So hypothetically that could happen, and he could also appeal the defamation finding in the civil court. I hope for all of us, and particularly those who work in media, that doesn't happen, because it's been a long time with this one, and I think we're all ready to move on.
I don't want to say anything because I just want this baby to be put to bed.